Great to have your company on Sky News across Australia. Now, Victoria's Chief Health Officer and his department boss have been issued a please explain over evidence withheld from the investigation into the state's disastrous hotel quarantine scheme. Meanwhile, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews hints he could ease restrictions earlier than planned amid widespread backlash from business leaders. Joining me now, Federal Victorian MP Katie Allen. Katie, great to see you tonight. So take us through what happened today. I mean, essentially Brett Sutton has been wrapped over the knuckles and he's been asked to come back and provide extra evidence to this hotel quarantine inquiry.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I mean, it just seems extraordinary, really. This is just keeps on being dragged out, and we're hearing that actually Brett Sutton did know about something that he claimed he didn't by the look of this email trail, and it was as far ago as in March. And so he had actually said that he didn't know about any of this information, and then suddenly we find this email has surfaced. It was actually following a media expose, so it's a bit concerning, really, that the inquiry, which was meant to uncover what was going on with this quarantining fiasco in hotels, why it was happening, and what we should do about it, you know, in the future. So it's really quite concerning that it's the media that is actually leading the charge with finding out what went on with the hotel quarantine fiasco.
Katie, I reckon that's a really good point. I mean, here you've got an inquiry that's designed to provide Victorians, 800 Victorians have died, so that's 800 families will go into Christmas without a loved one. And this inquiry has basically come up with a donut so far, and you've got people in the media, of course Sky News' own Peter Credden leading the way. Chris Eccles has gone, Jenny McCarkos has gone. Now you've got a media report which points the finger at Brett Sutton. What does that demonstrate about the effectiveness of this inquiry right now?
Well, I have to say, you know, just watching this inquiry unfold has been incredibly frustrating because it's almost like the public is being treated as dim-witted. The amount of times I've heard a minister or representative say, "I just don't know," seems extraordinary. And the ability for those who are interrogating the witnesses to actually accept that "I don't know" is sufficient, and then to actually appear to mislead the public as well. So I think that I feel that the public feels it's being taken for a bit of a ride with this inquiry, and we're now seeing, after the inquiry was meant to have closed, the last witness was Premier Andrews. Again, we felt no sense of satisfaction that either he didn't know what was going on, which is very concerning considering he is the top man in the job, or he did know what was going on and he's covering up. So I think there's a lot of concern in Victoria, and this inquiry has kept dragging on. It's meant to have closed. We're meant to have a report by now so that we know what went on, what went wrong, and what we can do about it in the future. So it's very, very concerning for Victorians, and I think they're kind of over it, actually.
Katie, we're now seeing indications from Premier Daniel Andrews that he may be looking at easing restrictions a little bit earlier. He had slated that first week of November, but there was a massive public backlash led by august groups such as the Business Council of Australia, Wes Farmers, Cosboa. You had Peter Strong come out and basically say he's treating people like fools. Is it within his soul to actually admit that maybe he has gone a little bit too hard and he may actually open some of those or ease some of those restrictions this weekend?
I think the most important thing, Peter, is that the case number is down. And I've had media commentators say to me, "Oh, but we had such a high case number in the past, we have to be more careful." The facts are the facts. The case numbers are down. We're told by Premier Andrews that his test and tracing system is up to it and that it's stepped up. We know that there were definite deficits in it, which is why we got into this problem in the first place. And so what I'd like to hear is Premier Andrews stepping up and saying, "I have trust in the system that I have rebuilt from a testing and tracing point of view, and now it's time to open up." But more than that, Peter, it's really quite distressing for local businesses in Higgins about they don't seem to be in the agenda going forward. They aren't front and centre. I feel Premier Andrews sees business as more as the problem rather than the solution. We know that business knows how to do a COVID-safe approach. I've had businesses and industry groups come to me saying, "We have already submitted a COVID-safe approach, protocols that have been signed off by health authorities. We've been speaking to the government or begging the government to listen to us so that we can work together. And it seems that there's this absence of interest in engaging with government, with business. And I think that's a real sense of frustration, that it seems to be all about the individual aspects of whether you can have a 5 kilometre or 25 kilometre radius, which, don't let, absolutely important for individuals, but businesses really have to be part of the solution, because as we've said from the very start of this COVID, this is a health crisis, but it's equally an economic crisis, and you need to see both going hand in glove.
That's exactly the point we've been making on Sky News for the last 6 months. I mean, it's all very well to get the health narrative right, but there's a wave, a third wave if you like, that relates specifically to the economic narrative. And I was going to ask you about some of your constituents and their problems with mental health. That's another area that I think we're underestimating here. I've got a sense when JobKeeper ends in March next year, when the insolvency rules change, that we're going to get a real situation. That's when things are going to get dire.
Absolutely. Look, we know that people and businesses are hanging there at the moment, and that's why they're so eager to hear a forward plan by Premier Andrews that provides certainty. We know with the first sort of lockdown, and then there was an opening up, businesses locally were throwing out things. It's just terrible. I've heard of hotels throwing out $20,000 worth of food, giving it away with that when they could. Absolutely devastated because they had, this opening and shutting aspect. And so the Prime Minister was very clear from the start, we don't want a sawtooth economy. Business absolutely needs certainty. So that is, in some ways, been the argument of why Premier Andrews is saying he wants to stay closed, he wants to be certain. But what he has to be certain of is that we need to live with COVID. We need to have the defence mechanisms in place to protect and support us. And so we've now moved to a new phase with COVID. To begin with, we had to use quarantining to protect us from the hotspots around the world, and that's actually ended up being most of the world, unfortunately. That quarantining has worked in 7 out of 8 jurisdictions, so we know it's highly effective when done properly. And then the testing and tracing, again, is working in places like New South Wales, where they have had similar caseloads to us before we lost control of testing and tracing and therefore ended up getting 700 cases a day. That hasn't happened in New South Wales. So we know New South Wales knows how to do test and tracing. So Victoria has sent a team up to New South Wales. They've learnt from that. We now know how COVID acts. We now know what works to keep people safe. The third line of protection is the hand hygiene, the physical distancing, and sometimes mask wearing when community transmission is very high. But we're at the point in Victoria where the caseload is right down. So it's time to be confident, to open up business, to make sure we're working with business to make sure there's a COVID-safe approach and bring the community with us on this journey, a very important journey going forward. And leading into Christmas in particular, because we know the last 8 weeks of the year is one of the highest turnover periods for sectors like retail and hospitality. They're eagerly awaiting being able to open up their business and get back off their knees. And that impact, not only on businesses but on individuals employed by those businesses, that lack of certainty is having a huge impact on mental health. And I've spoken to local doctors and have heard from them really devastating stories about people who are very, very depressed, extremely anxious, children in particular. I've had a local GP tell me that she's never had to prescribe antidepressants for children as young as 12. She's seeing skyrocketing cases of eating disorders, and we're also seeing postnatal depression for mums who are not able to be supported when they've got a newborn baby. So there's a lot of other things going on, not just the effect of COVID on COVID cases, but the effect of COVID on mental health as well.
Federal Victorian MP Katie Allen, really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.